In other news now this week, the world has spoken, but China is having none of it. Beijing has dismissed a decision by an international court which ruled against China's territorial claims in the South China Sea. The decision at The Hague is a landmark case in the long-running disputes between China and several Southeast Asian nations. The ruling is legally binding, but as VOA's Henry Ridgewell reports, the court has no power to enforce it.
Beijing lays claim to a vast U-shaped line of jurisdiction in the South China Sea, known as the Nine-Line, which includes several disputed islands and fishing grounds. Oil and gas reserves are also thought to exist beneath the seabed. China is building artificial islands on coral reefs, some of which are being turned into military bases. The Hague Tribunal ruled Tuesday that Beijing had violated the sovereignty of the Philippines, which brought the claim to the court. In Manila, there were celebrations, but also concern that it will be difficult to enforce the ruling. For weeks, China has pumped out propaganda criticizing the court and questioning its jurisdiction. Minutes after the ruling, Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the decision, known as an award, was null and void.
And joining me now to talk about what all this means for the region, VOA Asia Weekly blogger Steve Miller joins us. Welcome, Steve. And from VOA's Mandarin service, we have reporter Kathy Guofu Yang. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Kathy, I'm glad you're here. I want you to explain a few things for us. So China says this decision was null and void. On what grounds can it actually say that this decision is null and void by a group that it is a member of?
At the very beginning, China said that the tribunal has no jurisdiction over the case because in substance, it's about their territorial rights and also the maritime delimitation.
So this court ruling does not address that sovereignty issue?
Well, not. According to the court, they were saying we just consider the maritime entitlements of the reefs and rocks.
I don't want to get into the weeds on a legal ruling because I understand there were 600 pages,
about
Steve.
499 in all. And as Kathy was saying, what it really came down to as what the merits of the case were. China always argued that this was about sovereignty issues, while the Philippines made it very clear in their pleadings that this was about how UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas, applied to the so-called Nine-Line. And the
But since China is a member of UNCLOS, I mean, isn't it obligated to also follow rules and rulings made by that group?
Well, it is, and that's kind of one of the fallouts from this. But from China's perspective, the court made an error. And from China's perspective, this was about sovereignty and not about UNCLOS. And that's where the disagreement over the jurisdiction of the case came from Beijing's perspective.
Kathy, clearly this was not the result that China wanted, even though it is saying that this court does not have anything new to say to us. What has the reaction been from the Chinese public?
Well, Chinese public, they were, of course, they feel like so uncomfortable and they cannot accept that. Because use myself as an example, when I was young, we were taught when we were at primary school, elementary school, that the South China Sea is China's.
There's a certain amount of nationalism involved in making this claim, right? But when you say that 90% of the South China Sea is China's territory, and you have many other countries that are not only geographically but geologically attached to some of these islands, how can China make that claim?
Well, China said our ancestors were there. And 2,000 years ago.
There's nothing in the history books that will say that. There's nothing in the history books that says anything below Hainan Island actually belongs to China.
Well, they said that the fishermen were there. And the thing is, it's a little bit complicated.
So are fishermen from Borneo in the Philippines, correct?
Well, now China is sort of, there is something new, some new development. China sort of saying that we never claimed we have exclusive fishing or historical rights there. That's kind of different from the previous stance. Previously, they never tried to clarify what the so-called U-shaped line or Nine-Line is.
So Steve, obviously Philippines is not the only country that's involved currently in territorial disputes with China. How significant is this ruling for other countries like Vietnam or Borneo, for example?
Well, I spoke with Paul Reichler. He was the lead attorney for the Philippines in this case, and he feels, based on what he called the scholarly work of the award, is that perhaps in the future, if there were other nations bringing claims against China, or even any issues related to UNCLOS, this could serve as a precedent with it. We saw a few years ago Vietnam dealing directly with China when it moved its oil rig into its exclusive economic zone, and some analysts have said that perhaps based on this award, Vietnam may lodge its own claim in the
So there may be other countries following suit.
Perhaps.
Why is China so interested in this property? Is there like oil reserves, kind of mineral kind of deposits there that might be profitable for whatever country actually owns that particular piece of water?
Well, that actually was what China said, that why the South China Sea becomes so important for other countries. That they used to be us, and nobody like make any claimants. Now because the discovery of the oil and gas
now
resources, like everybody
wants
a piece of that. Yeah.
Well, what happens next to the? I guess what I'm hearing a lot is that the biggest concern is that China is interested in making military installations in some of these disputed lands. What happens to some of those military installations that have already been built, for example, in Spratly Islands?
Well, that's one of the big questions, because the court didn't exactly say you have to leave now. It just said that this is, inherently Philippine territory based on UNCLOS rules. It's left up to the Philippines and China to negotiate how to move forward from here, and that's one thing that President Duterte has said that he's willing to start doing.
So Kathy, I know China says it's not going to respect this ruling whatsoever, but doesn't it face a potential backlash, a public relations kind of a nightmare if it imposes its will against the wishes of the rest of the world?
Yeah, certainly they realize, aware of the reputation cost they're going to pay, they're going to suffer. So China launched a PR campaign way before the announcement of the insurance of the award. And after that, they try to attack the legitimacy of the tribunal. So, yeah, it is a nightmare for them, but they try to attack the legitimacy of the tribunal rather than doing something else.
Steve, you're familiar with China's role in that part of the world. It's very influential. How much damage could it suffer as a result of resisting this order?
Well, analysts have told me over the years, most recently as this past week, that because of the scope of this decision and China's refusal to accept it, it may cause other nations and other businesses to call into question doing business with China. I mean, China has a sluggish economy right now, and if they back out and don't adhere to this award, it may force others to ask, how much can I trust you to abide by other court decisions and other agreements that we have?
Mm-hmm. I'm out of time, but I give you 10 seconds. Do you have anything to say regarding China's position on this? Or is it status quo? We leave it at that.
I have nothing to say now.
She has nothing to say. My thanks to Kathy Guofu and Steve Miller. We are going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, we'll have a lot more, especially on race relations in this country. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.